Having lived a life well over a century, I have witnessed countless times how often the world shakes. I have experienced war, poverty, and the pain of letting go of the things I love. In my youth, I always blamed the world. Why does this happen to me? Why does my life never go as I intended? But looking back now, I realize that all those questions ultimately boil down to a single secret. The problem was not the world, but my own mind as I looked upon it. People often think that circumstances bring them down. However, I know for sure that what destroys a person is not the situation itself, but merely their reaction to it. Even when standing in the same rain, some write poetry, while others fall into despair. Even when facing the same failure, some rise again, while others stop right where they are. The only thing that makes that difference is the mind. Having spent my entire life as a professor, I have watched over countless students. Some were brilliant and others not. However, those who did not collapse until the end and continued on their own path were always the same. They were not particularly lucky people. They were simply people who did not lose their hearts. Even when they experienced failure, they did not crumble within themselves, nor did they entrust their self-worth to the judgment of others. In my youth, whenever I opened my eyes in the morning, worries would always come to mind first. Tasks to do, unresolved problems, mistakes from yesterday. Those thoughts weighed on my chest like heavy stones, forcing me to start the day. And without fail, those days went awry. I was hurt by a single small remark, and my heart wavered over trivial matters. Looking back now, what ruined that day was not the world, but the very first thought I chose that morning. It took me far too long to realize this simple truth. However, once I realized it, everything changed. When I open my eyes in the morning, I now ask myself with what mindset will I live today? This single question changes the direction of the day. If you choose worry, the day becomes heavy. If you choose gratitude, the day becomes light. This is not merely a statement, but a truth I physically confirmed throughout my life of over 100 years. Reaching old age, I have come to hold a single conviction. I mean, the fact that while humans cannot control far more than we think, we can simultaneously control things that are far more important or à the extent. We cannot change the world, but we can change our minds. We cannot stop the words and actions of others, but we can choose how to react to them. There was an incident like this once. One of my longtime students came to see me having fallen into deep depression after retirement. He said, "Professor, I feel like I have become useless." Those words contained the weight of time and heart that had lost itself. I had told him, "You have lost your job, not just yourself." Factors. He felt as he had vanished along with his job. That was when I realized, once again, the moment a person loses their mind. Conversely, if they protect their mind, they can start over no matter how much they lose. Having lived a long life, these words resonate deeply within me. The latter half of life is not by events, but by interpretation. They say that when you are young, there are many tasks and many choices. However, as one grows older, events become fewer. Instead, how one accepts those events determines the quality of life. The same loneliness is sublimated into solitude for some, while it plunges others into despair. Even while living through the same old age, some are peaceful while others are unhappy. That difference depends solely on the mind's interpretation. I no longer obsess over how the world treats me. Instead, I focus on how I handle my own mind. This is the simplest yet most difficult truth I have gained after living for 100 years. Please ask yourself, where is your mind right now? Is it dwelling on the regrets of yesterday? Or is it wandering in worries about the future yet to come? Or is it fully present in this moment? True life exists only in this very moment. And how you live that moment ultimately depends on your mind. As I grow older, I have come to see one undeniable fact even more clearly. It is not that a person collapses because their body ages, but that life begins to decline only when the mind ages first. This was not knowledge learned from books, but a reality I witnessed countless times with my own eyes. For many years, I students at the university and at the same time watched the latter half of the lives of countless colleagues and students. Among them were many who, in their youth, lived lives more diligently and uprightly than anyone else must. They were recognized at work, had stable families, and lived lives others envied. However, after retirement, their appearances would change surprisingly. There was a fellow professor. He was academically outstanding and a man of excellent character. His students respected him, and his colleagues trusted him. Yet, not long after his mandatory retirement, I saw that he had become a completely different person. He easily became irritated by trivial matters and reacted sensitively to what those around him said. He felt hurt that his children did not visit often and said that he was offended by even the slightest tone of his daughter-in-law. At first, I tried to understand him too. As time passes, everyone is bound to feel lonely and relationships change. However, as time went by, I came to see a deeper cause. What brought him down was not loneliness itself. It was his mind interpreting that loneliness. His words always held this thought: I have lived this way, so why are you treating me like this? On the surface, these words seemed justified, but deep within them lay comparison, paradigmal expectation, and a desire for validation. Ultimately, those feelings accumulated and turned into poison. The human heart is truly mysterious. Anyone can feel a small sense of disappointment. However, if you do not let go of it, and instead harbor it within your heart, it gradually changes form. What started as a simple regret turns into dissatisfaction over time and eventually resentment. And at some point, that resentment stains your entire life. I have seen countless people like this. In their youth, they were more diligent than anyone else, but as they entered old age and their minds grew clouded, they gradually drifted away from the world. Their relationships with the family slowly soured, and eventually many ended alone. They often said the world has changed. However, I used to think to myself, it wasn't the world that changed, but their hearts. One day, I came across a statistic. It was a study on what determines happiness in old age. Many people might think of money or health, but the results showed that the factors with the greatest influence are actually one's perception of relationships, and the ability to regulate emotions. In other words, happiness is determined by how one handles their mind, even in the same situation. This fact matched exactly what I had observed throughout my life. Those with a peaceful mind, despite physical ailments, knew how to accept life and be grateful. Conversely, those with a restless mind, even if physically healthy, lived constantly in a state of lack and dissatisfaction. I recall an old man. He was someone who spent his entire life comparing himself to others. When a friend was promoted, he lamented his own circumstances rather than rejoicing. And when his siblings lived in a bigger house, his own life felt shabby. He was happy for a moment when his children succeeded, but soon his heart grew uneasy again as he compared them to other children. Living his entire life this way, he never once felt satisfied. He always felt lacking, always regretful, and always wanted more. It was only when he reached the very end of his life that he said, "I have never once lived my own life." Those words lingered in my heart for a long time. Comparison is the fastest way to age the mind. While it may serve as a driving force of competition in one's youth, as one grows older, it becomes a poison that gnaws away at one's life. This is because the moment you try to keep up with the pace of others, your own path vanishes. There is also one more thing to be especially careful of in old age: the habit of harboring resentment. When you are young, you are busy and have so much to do that you do not have the luxury to hold on to your emotions for long. However, as you age, you have more time, and consequently, your mind dances to the past more often. Words heard in the past, memories of vows made, moments when you were not recognized. These serve as if they happened yesterday, shaking your heart. The problem lies in the fact that you cannot let it flow away and keep holding on to it. If you do that, your strength to live in the present gradually weakens. Ultimately, emotions from the past end up dominating your present life. This is the conclusion I have reached after living for 100 years. While physical illness is brought about by the passage of time, mental illness is caused by complacency. And that complacency begins with very trivial things: the desire to compare yourself to others, the craving for validation, and the resentment you cannot let go of. When these three things accumulate, even the most solid life will slowly begin to tilt. So if you are reading this now, ask yourself, are you carrying old resentment in your heart or heart? Or are you still tormenting yourself by comparing yourself to others? If so, you must start by practicing letting them go. It is not too late. Your mind can always become young again. Crossing over a century of time, I have tried to manage my mind in countless ways. In my youth, I relied on grand philosophies and difficult theories, and I tried to suppress my emotions with sheer willpower. But in the end, only one thing remained. It was the fact that guarding one's mind is never something grand, but begins with small repetitions. I have truly taken a long detour to realize this, and I still remember it. It was a deep winter dawn, the campus filled only with cold air. My mind was particularly troubled that day. My research wasn't going as planned, and my relationships were tangled. Suddenly, I stopped in my tracks, stood by a window in the empty hallway, and began to quietly catch my breath. At first, it was just a vague action. However, as I inhaled and exhaled again and again, surprisingly, the waves in my mind began to settle in little by little. That was when I felt it for the first time. The mind is not something to be suppressed, but something to be calmed. And complex methods and chosen simple habits. Every morning, I made sure to wake up at the same time, sat quietly, and felt my breath. Simply by focusing on that simple flow of inhalation and exhalation, my mind miraculously found its place. Doesn't modern psychology say the same thing? I confirmed through life, not just theory, that breathing slowly stabilizes the nerves and lowers emotional waves. And so I began to write. People think of writing as recording, but for me it was organization. As I wrote down, the thoughts started tangled in my head. Line by line, my mind became settled, much like a ball of yarn unraveling. When I was angry, I wrote why I was angry. When I was sad, I wrote what made me sad. The fascinating thing was that the moment I put things into writing, my emotions became separated from me. Emotions that felt like a wave while inside me dwindled into a single sentence the moment they were written. And as I gazed at that sentence, I was no longer swept away by those emotions. This simple repetition sustained me. I was once asked this question, Professor. How have you been able to live for so many years without wavering? To that question, I smiled briefly and replied, I have never once remained unwavering. I simply returned every day. People desire unwavering life, but that is closer to an illusion. What matters is not remaining unshaken, but how quickly you return to your center after being shaken. And that strength comes not from a special talent, but from repeated habits. I have realized another important fact. Stillness is not given, but created. Many people try to find peace of mind externally, quiet environment, a stable situation, comfortable relationship. Of course, those things help. This is because, well, situation. Listen. Amidst the turmoil of war, on a hospital bed on the day, I let go of the work I loved. I tried to quietly catch my breath and hold on to my heart. And each time I felt that stillness, a choice, not a situation. Now that I've reached old age, I've become even more convinced that the human mind becomes stronger the more it is trained. It is like a muscle, it weakens. If not used, becomes with repetition. Therefore, I would like to advise you, do not make grandiose resolutions. Instead, try repeating just one very small thing every day. When you open your eyes in the morning, close them for a moment and take 3 deep breaths. When your mind wavers during the day, try to feel your breath for even just 10 seconds. And at night, write down your feelings, even if it is just a single line. If these 3 simple things accumulate, at some point you will realize that you are wavering less than before. Having lived a long life, I have learned that what sustains life is not grand resolutions, but small repetitions. And within those repetitions, we become a little stronger and a little freer. I have realized this over my long life. What shakes a person most deeply is not the storms of the world, but emotions and relationships. No matter how strong the wind blows, a tree standing alone can withstand it, but amidst tangled branches, even the slightest tremor easily causes wounds. In particular, anger is an emotion I have guarded it against my entire life. In my youth, I was taught that suppressing anger was a virtue. Though when I got angry, I would grit my teeth, hold it in, and pretend nothing was wrong to get through it. However, that emotion did not disappear. It used to build up deep within my heart, only to burst out in a much larger form one day. Conversely, there were days when I couldn't hold back and revealed my emotions exactly as they were. Each time the relationship was hurt, and I too regretted it for a long time. It was only after a long time had passed that I realized something. That emotions are not meant to be suppressed or exploded, but to be observed. There was an incident like this once. A close colleague misunderstood a single remark I made and became furious. At that moment, displeasure welled up inside me as well. In the past, I would have immediately retorted or simply endured and kept the coldness inside. But that day was different. I paused for a moment and muttered to myself, I'm angry right now. Surprisingly, this single sentence created distance between me and my emotion. In that moment, I was no longer anger itself, but being someone who observed anger. Then, catching my breath, I asked myself, why does this remark provoke me so much? As I followed that question, I realized that my pride was being shaken far more deeply than the other person's words. Just as emotions always seem to come from the outside, they are often actually amplified from within. The same is true for sadness. I have experienced several major partings in my life. Letting go of a loved one is a pain that never becomes familiar no matter how long one lives. Each time I was immersed in deep sorrow. However, I tried to hold on to one thing, to immerse myself in sadness, but not to be consumed by it. I often told myself, this emotion too will pass. In reality, all emotions flow. Joy, anger, and sadness all eventually pass. Yet we try to hold on to them. We cling to joy, wanting it to linger longer, and when we try to push away sadness, we end up sinking even deeper. Having lived a long life, I found that the wisest way to handle emotions is this: neither hold on to them nor push them away. Simply acknowledge them and let them flow. And I also learned an important truth about relationships. People are hurt and broken the most within relationships. This is especially true for those closest to them. Because we love family, spouses, and children, we place deeper expectations on them. And when those expectations are not met, the disappointment is even greater. I remember a woman. She was living with her mother-in-law as a daughter-in-law. Her mother-in-law was not a bad person. On the contrary, she spared no advice out of a desire to help her daughter. However, as time went on, that advice began to feel like interference, and fighting wind gradually built up in her heart. The problem was that she could not express those feelings. At first, she endured it. Then she swallowed it inside, and eventually she bottled it up within her. Then, one day, triggered by a very trivial incident, all those emotions burst out all at once. And then the relationship has never returned to how it used to be. Listening to that story quietly reflected. This is not a matter of personality, but a matter of distance. An appropriate distance is absolutely necessary between people. If you are too far apart, the relationship breaks. If you are too close, you end up hurting each other. Especially in close relationships, the additional courtesy is even more important. Many people think of courtesy as mere politeness, but I do not see it that way. I believe Courtesy is ultimately a distance that protects each other's hearts. And there is one more thing I really want to tell you. Being easily swayed by the words of others is like lending the master of your own heart for a brief moment. I have lived my entire life amidst various evaluations. I received praise and criticism. Some days I was highly regarded, while other days I was disparaged without reason. In my youth, although those words shook my heart deeply more, a single word from one person would shatter my day, while the praise from another would fill me with excitement. However, as time passed, I gradually came to realize something. The words of others are like the wind. The wind blows and passes by, cannot be caught, and there is no need to be swayed by any game. What truly matters is how I view myself. If you believe in yourself, you may take the words of others into consideration, but there is no need to be swayed by them. Conversely, if you lack confidence in yourself, your heart is bound to waver at even the slightest remark. Therefore, guarding your heart ultimately means managing your emotions while simultaneously your center within relationships. Those who uphold these two things will not crumble in any relationship. Now, standing at the tail end of my life, I dare to say that life is ultimately determined not by external events, but by the direction of the heart. I have witnessed the beginnings and ends of countless people, and within that flow, I have discovered a single common truth, even if they live in the same world. Those with different hearts lead completely different lives. In our youth, we try to find our destiny externally. Good circumstances, good opportunities, good connections. Of course, it is true that these things influence life. However, they are not everything. It is because what determines a depth deeper than the environment is our environment is precisely our heart, which interprets that environment. I have come to this conviction while observing countless disciples throughout my life. Even though they started under similar conditions, some grow old peacefully while others ultimately meet their end in misfortune. That difference was neither ability nor wealth. Ultimately, it was a difference in how one handled their heart. Now I wish to quietly convey three things to my children. These are principles I have never let go of throughout the long years. First, do not let your heart wander in vain. People often give their hearts over the most trivial matters. A single word heard in the morning, someone's indifferent expression, an unexpected small inconvenience. Such things shake the heart, and that shaking can ruin the day. I, too, have had such days. Days when I was sat by trivial matters and lived holding on to those feelings all day long. However, when I look back in the evening, what ruined the day was not the event itself, but the time I chose to dwell on that emotion. So I often ask myself where is my heart staying right now? This single question has the power to return the heart to its proper place. Second, do not compare yourself to others. This is one of the truths I realized the latest. Comparison makes humans constantly anxious. Looking up reveals my shortcomings, while down brings a sense of superiority, but neither brings true peace to the mind. Especially these days, the world is filled with structures that fuel comparison. Dreams are overflowing with people who seem to lead better lives, be more successful, and look happier. However, I can make a firm decision. All of it is merely a part of life, not the whole. I remember an old man who once lived his life constantly comparing himself to others. In his final moments, he said, I spent my whole life envying others' lives and failed to live my own. Those words have lingered in my heart for a long time. Your path is your own. The moment you try to keep up with the pace of others, your direction begins to blur. Therefore, simply walk silently in your own place, at your own pace. Or do not pass through yourself completely. This might be the most important advice. Many people are too harsh on themselves. They blame themselves for even small mistakes and cannot tolerate their imperfections. I, too, had such times. I hated my inadequate self and tried to become better. However, it was only after a long time had passed that I realized that pushing yourself too hard does not lead to growth. True change begins with understanding. When you make a mistake, instead of blaming yourself and asking, why did I do this? Try to understand that you made this choice in this situation. That small understanding protects your heart and gives you the strength to rise again. An elderly woman once told me this, I have been warm to others my whole life, but I have been too cold to myself. Hearing that confession, I was speechless for a long time. Though you, at least, must trainable. When things are tough for yourself, and when you fall, allow yourself time to get back up. That is the deepest way to protect your heart. These three things may seem simple, but they are things that must be practiced throughout one's life. However, what is certain is that as you follow this path, at some point you will realize that your heart has gradually become lighter and less shaken by the noise of the world. I have now let go of many things. Regrets over unfulfilled goals, remorse for the past, and obsession with the judgment of others. In that place, only one thing remained, a calm mind. Having lived a long life, I have come to find these words truly truthful. What remains at the end of life is not how much you possessed, but how you were. It does not matter where your life is or what situation you are in. If your mind is at peace, you are already living well enough. And that hospital is not far away. It lies within your child's choice at this very moment. So even just once today is fine. Try saying this to yourself. It is okay. I am enough just the way I am. That single phrase will make your child's life a little warmer.